the whole 9 yards. Why don't you get my chessboard in there and I'll let him take a picture of the chessboard that I made.
What are you making these days at your shop?
Well, I make a lot of clocks, and you can see a sample of those around here. I don't see any there.
There's one up there.
Yeah, there's one up
Okay.
there.
There's one there that I made. I made about 10 of, I made 20 of those. And then I made a lot of other smaller clocks.
Here's
That one?
This was one of the first ones that I ever made, and it's a very simple clock, just with just this works fits in it, and but it's a very nice little gift for someone. And I usually autograph the bottom, which you can see here. I have a wood burning iron that I burn in my trademark, handcrafted by R.E. Allen. So, but I make a lot of different sets of clocks. And Miss Beverly just brought in, this is a chessboard. It's made from bird's eye maple and walnut. And the walnut is from my farm in Ohio. It was in a building about, up in Kenton, about 14 years. And Fred Daring and I brought it down, and so, as I say, the walnut in this board is from my farm, and I buy this little inlay strip here, and you have to be very careful that all these squares are very precise, because if they get off, then by the time you lay up the first row and the second row, by the time you get to the last row, they're really off. So it's a precision operation, and like I say, it's mounted on a piece of plywood on the back, and I get a lot of kick out of making these. I think I've made about 15 of these.
At least.
What else do you make? Do you like to do all this detailed work? You like things with a lot of details?
Craftsmanship.
Well, yeah, I guess. And here's a cutting board that Miss Bev was going to bring up, and I probably made 20 of these. And again, this is maple, and this is called Purple Heart, and this is called Yellow Heart, and here's some of the walnut from my farm. So I've made, I don't know, 20 or 30 of these, and
Different woods, too.
I've never sold a thing, and I've always given items away. So it just gives me kind of a charge to be able to make something and say, well, here's a little sample of my workmanship.
How do you get this curve in here? How do you get this nice curve? What do you?
Well,
what's
you
the
drill a
technique?
hole, and you have a little jigsaw that you put the blade, take the blade out of a jigsaw, put this on, put the jigsaw blade back in, and you cut that out. And then, of course, you shape this with sanders and, you know, by hand. So it's kind of a tedious operation.
Yeah, that's nice. How long does it take you to make one of those?
Oh, I don't know. I make them about 6 or 8 at a time. Glue them up, and
It's beautiful.
yeah. Here's another clock that Miss Beverly has brought in.
We got that.
So I used to make a lot of these, and but then I sort of graduated away from this. Is there one of my more modern design clocks around?
I don't think so.
And
Okay.
you've created some of your own designs for them.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can
Yeah.
find
Haven't you?
Yeah.
maybe one here, I'm not sure.
And of course, what other things do I make? Here's a little stool that an elephant could sit on. And this again is solid walnut. So, you know, you make the top and you make the legs, cut the legs out, and then you attach the top with screws, 4 screws that holds the top.
Looks like you got a spider living in there.
Yeah, we got a little spider in it. I can tell that Beverly hadn't been dusting this properly.
I'll have to get on the ball.
Yeah, you'll have to get on the
I'll have
ball.
to get on the ball.
Get some of your domestic help.
Here.
Oh, there's a big clock that I made. I probably only made about a half a dozen of those.
Yeah.
But this is made from one piece, no correction, it's made from two pieces. And again, it's just a little different design than most. So, but it's
How do you put those together?
what, the wood?
Mhm.
With glue.
What kind of glue do you use?
Oh, I have a new glue now that's made by people over in Columbus. I can't think of the name of it. But it's a very nice glue, and you know, it's waterproof, and it never fails. So
It's the wood glue?
oh yeah, and it makes a joint that you can't even, you know, you can tell the difference in the tone of the wood, but of course there's no way you could tell that this was a joint if the wood matched up properly, which it doesn't. But this is a lighter piece and a darker piece.
You use a machine sander and you hand sand both?
That I machine sand these, and then as you say, I hand sand them as the last step of the
Do
operation.
you have any kind of a coating or treatment on that?
I give it lacquer and what else do I give it sanding sealer first, and then about 2 coats of lacquer. So, works very nicely and puts a good finish on it.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So you've been woodworking for what, 5 or 6 years now, would you say?
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, when did I build a barn? About
5 years ago.
4 or 5?
Started building 5 years ago because
I started about-
at your birthday. You were working on it.
Okay, I started, yeah, that's right. I started about 5 years ago during my 80th birthday.
That's great.
So,
It gives you a lot of pleasure doing that, doesn't it?
oh, I love it, yeah. Like I say, I should start selling, but I've never sold a thing, and just give them away.
I bet your friends and family are really pleased to
Oh,
have
I
you
hope
make
so.
them.
I hope
Pretty
so.
great. Now let's see, you all were talking about high school a while ago when you were poker. What was the next thing?
Well,
next
we were
step
talking
after
about what he liked in high school. He liked the
And then
metalworking in the shop.
And Miss George.
Yes, and Miss George.
Mhm.
And you finished high school, and then what'd you do then?
Well, after high school, I spent about 6 months looking for a job, and I obtained a job in Dayton, Ohio, for work for Burroughs Adding Machine. And it was my intention, you can put that down on the floor if you like.
Okay.
It was my intention to become a serviceman, to work on Burroughs equipment, Moon Hopkins, and you know, whatever Burroughs Adding Machine made. They were based in Detroit. So I got a job there for $16 a week, and
Where'd you stay?
I stayed at the YMCA in Dayton, paid $4 a week to stay there. So I worked at Burroughs Adding Machine for probably a year, and they were going to send me to school in Detroit to become a service technician. However, that was about 1941 or 2, and I think it was 41. Yeah, it was 41. And due to the fact that we were in a war at that time, they elected not to send me to Detroit to go through their school because it'd probably be a waste of time and a waste of their money. So since they elected to do that, I had a friend there that got me a job at Wright Field. And as I say, this was in Dayton. They had Patterson Field and they had Wright Field. So I went to work at Wright Field, and I got a big pay increase. I made $1,440 a year.
What did you do there?
I had charge of all the engines, aircraft engines that were removed from certain aircraft, and if an engine was replaced, I'd record the serial number of that, the one removed, and insert the serial number of the one that was installed.
What kind of airplanes?
I think it was B-25s, B-24s, and B-17s
Were those for the war effort?
for the war effort. Exactly.
Did you work for an aviation company? Or
No, I worked at Wright Field. It was the government. It's a government operation.
the government, okay.
So I worked there about 3 to 4 months, as I recall, and I was just on the verge of becoming a draftee. And I thought, whoa. So I didn't want to be a gravel agitator, which was
What is a gravel agitator?
that's in the infantry.
Oh.
So I didn't want to be a gravel agitator. So
That's a good one.
I enlisted in the Air Force at Patterson Field. And of course I was a private, and during that time I went through basic training, which took about 6 weeks, and then I thought, well, gee, you know, I had my specialty was going to be working on pressure aircraft instruments, which was airspeed, altimeter, whatever was a pressure aircraft instrument, but basically airspeeds and altimeters. And so I was interested in getting a promotion and being a private. I said to the sergeant one day, I said, you know, I'd like to go through pressure aircraft instrument school. And I said, what do you think the results would be? He says, well, if you go through pressure aircraft instrument school and come back, do that successfully, you'll say, well, we'll make you a sergeant. I said, well, that's a good deal. So I did. And I went to American Airlines Pressure Aircraft Instrument School in Flushing, New York. And that was about a 6-week course. So I came back from that. Had a great time in New York, by the way.
Good. We'll talk about that.
So I came back and took my graduation certificate into the sergeant. And I said, well, here's my certificate. I said, now what about my stripes? And he says, well, I never promised you any stripes. I said, what? So anyway, that took care of that. I was still a private, and I was very displeased about him saying that he never promised me anything, well, when he really did. So I said, well, I'll tell you, if that's the case, I said, I think I'm going to apply for aviation cadets. And he says, well, go ahead. So I went from Lockburn Army Air Base to Columbus, downtown Columbus, and I took the physical and I took the mental, and I passed both of them in flying colors, and I was chosen to be an aviation cadet. So I came back and told the sergeant, you know, I said, hey, Sarge, you know, I'm going to be leaving your operation here, leaving your outfit. And he says, well, where are you going? I said, I'm going to be an aviation cadet. He says, good deal.
What is an aviation cadet?
Well, that's the first step in becoming a pilot or a navigator or a bombardier in a flying crew.
You
So-
say you passed the mental and the physical. What do you mean by the mental?
Well, they give you, in order to be an aviation cadet, you have to pass a mental exam. And I don't know which is first, the mental or the physical.
They
But
called it a mental exam
Yeah.
as opposed to a psychological exam?
yeah, it's a mental exam. Yeah. So you have to pass that, and I don't know which one's first, whether the physical is first or the mental, but you have to pass both of them.
But what kind of a test was it on the mental side?
Psychological, probably.
Probably psychological.
So you were interviewed by somebody?
Interviewed, and then you take this test, and
Written test.
then they give you the results whenever. I don't know how long it took me to get the results, but I passed both tests, and so with that, well, I was all set to leave the outfit in Lockburn Army Air Base in Columbus.
Where'd you go then?
So then I was shipped to Santa Ana, California on a train, and through through classification there, I was appointed or elected to be a bombardier.
Is this 1943 now, or
This is 1940, probably 42, late 42.
42?
So when I arrived, they run you through what they call classification, and they rolled us out. I remember one morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, and it was really cold in California. I think this was January or February, but at 6 in the morning in Santa Ana, California, I mean it's cold. And of course, as I recall, I had on an overcoat and, you know, plenty of warm clothes, but I was still just shaking and shivering. And they sent us over to a barracks to give me these tests to determine whether or not I could become a pilot. I wanted to be a pilot. And one of the tests was that they give you a little stylus, and they have like a 33 RPM record. Is that about that big for a 33?
12 inch.
Okay. So they started this record up, and it had a spot on it about as big around as a quarter. And they said, okay, here's a stylus. We're going to start this going in a rotation circle, and you keep the stylus on that quarter.
Was it going counterclockwise or clockwise?
I don't remember which way it went, but
Okay.
I was shaking so badly that, man, you know, it'd be on there for a minute and then it'd be off and on and on. And I thought, oh, you know.
He goes, ship you hope.
So then the next test was, they gave me another stylus like this, only smaller, and they gave me a thing to hold this into like this. And they said, now hold that stylus out there and don't touch the sides, because every time you touch the sides, it's going to record whatever it records. So I said, okay, you know. So I'm holding that out there, and like I say, shaking. And I know I touched the sides too many times, but anyway, the result of all that was when we went back to the barracks, I said, well, you know, telling my buddies, I said, hey, I'm going to be a gunner. I said, I know I flunked the classification course. So anyway, I was pleased to find out that I was classified and chosen to be a bombardier. So with that, I went to school in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Started out with 180 people, and after 3 months and a successful bomb test run and all this and that and successful training, after 3 months we were down to 90 people.
Wow, that's
They had washed out every other person. They didn't need bombardiers then. Fortunately, I was one that made the grade, so I did pass, and at the completion of that course, I was made a second lieutenant.
Now, did you go back to Santa Ana after that?
I didn't go back to Santa Ana anymore until after the war.
Did you meet anybody when you were in Santa Ana that had a big impression on your life? Made a big impression on your life?
I'm not sure you need to hear about that. It wasn't Sam Maloof, by the way.
No, it wasn't.
Sam Maloof is a famous woodworker that everybody in the family knows.
Well, let's get into that later, because that's 3 years down the road. That's 3 years later.
Oh,
went
it is
back
3
to
years
Santa
later.
Ana.
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
3 years later.
Okay.
So,
Where, as the war is really getting hot, 42, 43, where is your brother Ken at this point?
he was a CB, and he was stationed in Hawaii. And
What's a CB?
well, the CBs were construction people that constructed bases, and you know, I don't know what all they did. My brother was in the supply area, and he said, we got talking about the war later, and he said, well, the biggest problem I had was worrying about an I-beam falling on me.
Mm-hmm.
So
He wasn't out there in the...
you know, I was over in China fighting the war, fighting the Japs, for a year and getting all shot up. And the biggest problem he had was having an I-beam fall on him.
Tell us sort of the.
And then he didn't get ice cream one night. He was upset about that.
He liked his sweets, Uncle Ken. Tell us about the chronology then. After you went to Albuquerque, then where did you go for after that? In terms of your service experience.
After I graduated from Albuquerque as a second lieutenant,
Did your parents come out for the graduation?
no.
No?
They didn't have the money, and you know, there was no way my mother and dad were gonna get a train and come from Bellefontaine, Ohio to Albuquerque, New Mexico. So I had my buddy,
Ed,
no, well,
Lindsay?
my buddy was gonna pin my wings on, and I called back to Bellefontaine, Ed Gillespie, Ed and Evelyn, and I asked Ed if he could come out and pin my wings on when I graduated from Albuquerque. So he said sure, he'd be glad to. So he came out, and he was there when I graduated from Bombardier School.
That's nice.
So that was the closest family I had to having my parents there.
You and Ed were lifelong friends?
We were lifelong friends in the pool room. He had a pool room, and I played pool in his pool room, and we were buddies all through high school, and so
And you had a farm together?
we ended up buying the farm together, but again, that's much later.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay, go ahead.
Were you seriously dating anybody, or were you just moving around so fast through these different experiences that it wouldn't make any sense?
when
41, 2, 3.
When you were in Santa Ana and Albuquerque?
I dated after graduation I went to Myrtle Beach for gunnery training, and I didn't date anybody there. And then I went to Columbia, South Carolina, and I had a few dates there with various people. And
How about high school?